close, actually. Check back daily for deals during Black Friday month and save now on appliances at Lowe's.
Mic check.
Our family-owned business is growing.
We're looking for the best technicians and state inspectors to join our team. Here's our pitch.
Audio is good to go.
A, benefits with 401k, paid time off,
And
sense refrigerator and air fry electric range exclusively at Lowe's. Find the right appliance for your jobs and properties today. It always
be affecting your MPGs, but the free AutoZone Fix Finder service can help. With the most complete free warning light report backed by technician verified fixes, you'll know what's affecting your gas mileage and more. And you don't have to drive too far to find the fix. The free AutoZone Fix Finder service is available at all 6,200 stores. See details at AutoZone.com.
find all the music that matters to you in a universe of audio. Odyssey.
the morning is back on Richmond's Alternative. 2-1.
of Academic Programs and Policy at the Virginia Community College System.
Good morning, I'm Steve Whitten. I teach sixth grade English at the new Mecklenburg County Middle School in Mecklenburg County.
Greetings and salutations. I'm Jessica Jones. I'm an agricultural education teacher and FFA advisor at Tunstall High School and represent CTE.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Gross, and I am the parent representative. I reside in Richmond City.
Good morning. I'm Maggie Clemens. I'm the Director of Licensure and School Leadership at the department.
Good morning, I'm Andy Cox. I'm the Director of Teacher Ed at University of Virginia's College at Wise, and I represent public higher ed.
Good morning, I'm Angela Schneider. I'm the Director of Professional Practices at DOE.
Dr. Joan Johnson, Assistant Soup Teacher Ed and Licensure, and we're excited to have you, Ann.
Good morning, Dickie Shaner, Chief of Staff at the Department of Ed, and happy to be here today.
Hi, I'm Carrie Swore. I'm representing the business lot, and I'm new to this board. It's only my second meeting. I live in Glen Allen. I'm also a parent and spent almost 10 years working for an alternative teacher prep program based in Baltimore. So.
Good morning, I'm Janelle Torbert, the Director of Teacher Education.
Hi, good morning. I'm Shelby Elliott. I'm from Prince William County Public School, the HR Administrator for Certification and Licensure, and I represent the Personnel Administrator.
Good morning. My name is David White. I'm Superintendent for King William County Public Schools, and I represent superintendents for Virginia.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Adrienne Bradley Gray. I'm a third grade teacher in Suffolk, Virginia.
Now, if we could have our guests introduce themselves, we would appreciate that.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Temple. I'm the Education Division Director for the School of Continuing Ed at Old Dominion University, and also the Program Director for the Career Switcher Program at ODU.
Good morning. I'm Mervyn Whiting, and I direct the Career Switcher Program at Regent University.
I'm Denny Keffer, and I am the Director of Extended and Distance Education at Shenandoah University, and that encompasses a Career Switcher program as well.
Good morning, I'm Missy Ogden. I represent the Virginia Community College Career Switcher program.
Good morning, Ida Ostrowski. I'm a consultant. I have a little business, Lighthouse Education Solutions.
Good morning. I'm Amanda Feel, and I'm a coordinator for HR working on licensing in Prince George County Schools.
Good morning. I'm Cassandra Stanley, and I am the interim director of the Office of Strategic Engagement at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I'm the director for the Career Switcher program.
Did we get everybody? Well, welcome. We are glad to have you here this morning. As a part of the packet that was sent out, we had an agenda. And have there been any changes to the agenda, Jen?
Senator McCullough is going to be joining us this morning, I hope, but no other changes. And also due to illness, Mr. Jim Chapman will not be with us. So item 1 will not be heard this session due to illness. He's not coming.
Okay, so do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Jessica Jones and Shelby Sutton. Second. Do we need to do a roll call vote? That is okay. Aye. Okay, and we also had minutes from our meeting on September 19th. Do we have any corrections to the minutes? We need a motion to approve the minutes of our September 19th, 2022 meeting.
So moved, David White.
David White and Jessica Jones. Thank you. Okay. We now move on to, oh, I'm sorry, roll call vote. Oh, we don't need that. Okay. Okay, so I will now welcome Joan Johnson to lead us through the presentations for today. We did. Yeah, David made the motion and Jennifer seconded. I was thinking Jones.
Think one person short of quorum. Unfortunately, I think we have to have 10 voting members. And that's why I think we wanted to do the roll call just to make sure. So we apologize. We will not be able to vote unless someone else comes in, but we will carry on with the other presentations and the rest of the meeting. And we'll postpone those. I think we should present the items so that we're hearing them and know what we want to work on in the coming year as well. And we'll have the same agenda for today, where we'll break out at 11 for our working lunch and the committees. And today we'll only have one committee due to illness of Eric Maffa, which will be the teacher prep committee. So others can join that one committee, but again, due to illness, Eric is not here to lead the subcommittee on licensure. Thank you. All right, well, good morning. We have the pleasure of having one of our very own ABTEL members with us this morning, Senator Jennifer McClinton, and she will be joining us this morning to highlight some of the work that she's doing, the priorities for the upcoming session, as well as how best and how she has felt that the liaison and role with ABTEL has benefited her in her current position. So thank you so much for being with us. If you join us at the podium.
Thank you and good morning. I hope you all will forgive me for not doing a PowerPoint presentation, but I feel like we get enough of them and I would just use this as a conversation. I'm Senator Jennifer McClellan. I am one of the legislative members of ABTEL. And before I kind of talk to you about that role, I'll just give you a quick background of me and my work in the legislature. So I got elected to the House of Delegates in 2005, spent 11 years there, and then moved over to the Senate in a special election when Donald McKeachin got elected to Congress in 2017. When I first got elected to the House, I was in the minority party, and I was told if you write the speaker a letter and tell him what committees you want to be on, maybe you'll get them. Being in the minority party, maybe you will also ensure you never get those committees. But I did ask to be on the education committee because it was my top priority. I am the daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter of educators, going back to my great-grandparents in Alabama who founded a school because the state of Alabama didn't educate Black children. My grandfather was a chemistry teacher at a high school at Fisk University before becoming a lawyer. My father was a professor at, eventually when I was born, Virginia State University. And my mom was the first member in her family, not only to go to college, but to go to high school, because in the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, where she was born, only the Catholic Church educated Black children, and it only went to 8th grade. So in my family, education was critically important. And I was taught to understand that it is key to individual success. It is key to thriving, healthy communities, and it is key to a thriving, healthy democracy. So that is the background that I brought into the General Assembly as a product of Chesterfield County Public Schools, and now as a parent of 2 children in Richmond Public Schools. So I have been a member of the PTA since my son started at Fox Elementary, and I will confess, going to my first Fox Elementary PTA meeting was one of the most intimidating events of my life, because if you walk out of that meeting and you haven't volunteered for something, you're probably not walking out of that meeting. But so I come to ABTEL as a policymaker, as a parent, and as a child of educators. So what is my role on ABTEL? Well, as you probably know, the state divides public education responsibilities between the state and the local level. Our Constitution, since 1868, which I didn't learn until I was an adult, by the way. Well, I guess the convention was in 1868, the Constitution was finally put in effect in 1870. But since 1870, our Constitution has promised a free, high-quality public education to every child in Virginia, and tasked the General Assembly with striving to create and achieve that. And so we set at the state level sort of overall policy, whether it's teacher licensure, whether it's the broad overview of curricula, the standards of quality, which sort of outline what the Board of Education says is the bare minimum, frankly, needed to provide a high quality education. But then it's up to the General Assembly to adopt that through state code and fund it. At the local level, the Constitution leaves the day-to-day supervision and running of the schools. And that delicate balance has been in place basically ever since. My role as a legislator is to, as one of 140 people, try to make sure that we are living up to our responsibilities to provide a free, high-quality public education. I will admit to you, we're not. I will admit to you that since, really for as long as I can remember, we have not fully implemented and funded the standards of quality as recommended by the Board of Education. I have put in a bill every year for several years. It's also, it's kind of become expected at this point, but I've put in a bill every year to fully implement the Board of Ed's recommended standards of quality. I've put a budget amendment in every year to fully fund it. And that in and of itself is $500 million a year. And every year it gets out of the policy committee and it doesn't pass the money committees until 2 years ago, we began to implement it in pieces. I also have put in a budget amendment every year to lift the cap on state funding of support personnel, which was put in place as a temporary measure in 2008 or 9 to balance the budget during the last recession. That in and of itself is another $500 million. So just those 2 things, the state has been underfunding our K-12 needs to the tune of about $1 billion a year. So we're already starting behind. Then we are supposed to figure out everything from, that's the bad news. The good news though, is we have begun to make progress with a huge speed bump called COVID. We had begun to make progress on a number of things. First, beginning piecemeal to implement the standards of quality, beginning piecemeal. We did this year lift the cap on support personnel by about 1/3. 2/3 are still there. We had begun to address the fact that our teacher workforce did not reflect the full diversity of the students that they taught. We had begun to address our reading scores by adopting, passing this year, the Virginia Literacy Act to align the teaching of reading with how science tells us we need to read, by aligning the teaching of teachers to read, teachers of reading teachers, to align that with how science tells us we need to read, and to put more reading specialists in the schools for kindergarten through third grade. We have begun to make progress on addressing some of the inequities that we find in our school system that are based on two things. One, the way we fund public education at the local level is based primarily on property taxes, which bakes some level of inequity when you have different levels of ability to pay for their public school system. And then the state pays through a funding formula that created before I was born, and I turned 50 this year, that looks at each locality's ability to pay and then says, we'll put in the rest, but doesn't look at, well, what else does that locality have to pay for? And we could actually spend all day on each of these little pieces. I'm trying to just kind of give you an overview. We have begun to address how do we streamline some of the teacher licensure processes. We have begun to address how do we align our accountability and standards of learning process to show growth, in addition to, can students just meet a score? We have begun to recognize how the standards of learning, the SOL testing process, had pushed creativity and critical thinking out of our day-to-day classroom experience. We had begun to recognize how, now that kindergarten is 100% academic, that the soft skills are now taught in early childhood education programs. We have begun to recognize how we need to expand access to those programs. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit and when the schools closed, and my daughter was in pre-K and my son was in fourth grade. So this is before the virtual learning began, and the 2 to 3 weeks is everyone was trying to figure out what we're going to do. I remember saying to my husband, however long this happens, when we get back to normal, so I thought then that was possible, when we get back to normal, we can't pretend that this never happened and think that these students will be ready to pick up and go as if COVID never happened. I will submit to you that's exactly what we've been doing. I will submit to you that after a year of virtual school, a year transitioning back into the schools, and we've seen it, whether it's behavioral issues, learning loss, mental health issues, straight up fatigue and burnout of our educator community, who for a full year and a half, more than usual, had to be educators, counselors, social workers, provide access to food, etc. We, in a lot of ways, have assumed we can just go back to normal and pick up where we left off and assume that the kids and the workforce and the teachers didn't have any effects. So what we have to do now, and what we're struggling to do now, frankly, is figuring out, and I would submit we need to do it without pointing fingers or laying blame. We need to just work together to say, here's how COVID has affected our students. Here's how COVID has affected our teachers and our educator workforce, our school boards, our superintendents, our principals, because they're part of the workforce too. And here's how we have to respond to meet our students where they are and intensively get them to where they need to be. Where do you come in? ABTEL, let's see if I can, this is the danger of doing things online. All right, ABTEL focuses on the teacher licensure and how do we get teachers in and prepared to meet our students where they are, to teach them the skills we want them to have when they graduate. You are a creature of state code, and the state code puts all of the relevant stakeholders at the table: teachers, superintendents, teacher prep programs, and yes, policymakers. So by law, you have 3 members of the General Assembly who are members, and our terms are concurrent with our legislative terms: 2 members of the House of Delegates, 1 member of the Senate. And what that does for us as policymakers is 2 things. One, I was a poli-sci student. We called it at University of Richmond. Some places call it government. So most of my adult life, I had focused on how a bill becomes a law. What I had not focused on is what happens next. And frankly, what happens next and how it is implemented and who implements it is more important to whether we actually fix the problem or advance the policy we intended to as the legislators that put that bill in place. Yes, it's on us to get the words right, and we don't always get the words right. But once a bill is passed, we move on. And it's up to the administration, the Board of Education, and the advisory councils, and for you, focusing more on the teacher licensure and workforce, it's up to you to implement it and to tell us when and where we got it wrong. And so for me, and a good example is, we recognized, some of us, as a member, as vice chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, and as a parent and as a former student, I had recognized that our teachers, who again, don't fully reflect the diversity of the students that they teach, weren't always aware, didn't have the cultural competency in some cases to deal with some of the issues that their students faced. We saw that firsthand in 2019, in February of 2019. We saw that firsthand in lesson plans that thought it was a good idea to recreate a slave auction. We saw it in moments where something that seemed innocuous actually triggered emotions or family memories or feelings among students that no one ever thought about. And so we recognized, as part of the licensure process, or as part of the teacher preparation process, we need to make sure that all teachers have the cultural competency to teach every student in their class. Because like it or not, and I see this as a policymaker, all of us base everything we do on our life experiences, what we know, or what we've learned. And so we need to make sure that you understand, why is it not a good idea to trigger something unintentionally? Why are certain holidays important in certain religions that you don't practice? Why should we think about what we do in the classroom, if we're in the classroom on those days? And so we passed a law to require a certain level of cultural competency training. It was not to indoctrinate anyone. It was to say, these are some things you need to understand about the students you're teaching if you're going to create an atmosphere of a community where those children feel they belong. That then comes to the board and ultimately to you to see how it's implemented. And I've seen, sort of just sitting through, listening in on the meetings, whether it's that or some other issue, well, here's something we didn't think about at the legislature that now we may need to go back and think about. Or here's how we make sure that got implemented in the way we intended it to, and not in a way that we didn't. The other important piece, though, is all of you are educational stakeholders who are in the classroom in some cases, or in the building or in the system in a way that we are not. I can probably count on one hand the number of legislators who are in a school building or on a school building grounds every day. I can count that on one hand. Most of my colleagues, it's been a very long time since they were in a school building, and they may not have gone to public school. So you help us understand what's actually happening in the field, what's actually happening in the teacher prep programs, and how can we use that to inform us on what we are doing. And you serve the same function, frankly, for the Board of Education. So your role, I would submit, in a lot of ways is more important than mine. My role on ABTEL is to serve as that bridge between you and the policymaking community, just as the Board of Education representatives is the bridge between you and the board. It's got to be a two-way street. It's not just us at the legislature saying, go do this, and then moving on. It is us saying, go do this. Now let me work with you to make sure it's done right. So I want to thank you for your service, because at the end of the day, the most important thing we can do, and we will do through education policy, is making sure that our schools give our students all of the tools they need to be productive adults. You are a critical component of that, because those students will not get those skills without a teacher. And the teacher, many of those students are with their teachers as much, if not more, than their parents. And we need to make sure that the teachers, who on any given day, in any given afternoon, will have to become a counselor or a social worker or a disciplinarian or a comforter. We have to make sure they have the skills that they need to meet that awesome responsibility. And you all are helping us do that. So I want to thank you for that. I apologize if you see me leave. It is not because your work is not important. It's because my annual physical is today. And if any of you have tried to schedule a physical, you know I cannot miss this appointment if I want to do it before my birthday. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. If not, yes.
Thank you, Senator McClellan. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you looking to fully fund SOQs as well as lift the support cap. I know that is important to school divisions across the Commonwealth. But I do have some concerns or questions about something we heard in VAS a couple of weeks ago. I know that we are facing a teacher shortage. And so it's important that we streamline certification requirements for incoming teachers. However, at the same time, it was mentioned that they are also looking to increase the cut scores on the SOLs. And I think it doesn't make sense to streamline certification process and then increase the standards for teachers, or excuse me, for students in those classrooms. It's almost antithetical doing those two things at the same time. And I think it supports a narrative, and I'm not going to go down there, but it supports a narrative that our children are not learning. Of course, we lost instructional time with the pandemic. It's important that we regain that loss. However, to increase cut scores on the standards of learning at this critical time, it's going to feed into a narrative that our kids are not learning. And we've heard a lot about NAEP scores. Well, our kids don't study for the NAEP. And it's a random assessment across Virginia. So I'm hoping that you will keep that in mind as you all look to, look and see what you all do with regard to public education in the Commonwealth.
Thank you for that. And I would say I 100% agree with you.
Any other questions? I will say on behalf of teacher education programs, one of the struggles that we have when Nancy Bradley at Virginia Tech, and we have several other Andy's at UVA-wise, is we cannot make enough teachers in our programs. I mean, we can do all we can do, but we cannot make enough teachers. But we do know the teachers who go through teacher preparation programs are stronger when they come out on the end. But sometimes what happens is the standards for our programs get so high that it's easier for students to say, oh, forget it. I'll just go teach somewhere and get hired provisionally. And not that there's anything wrong with provisionally hired teachers, but we just want to send them out as prepared as possible. And so any way that we can reduce testing requirements on teachers, I mean, it's a huge financial burden. It is also like the VCLA, communications and literacy assessment. We have students, and this happens at Virginia Tech, who can pass the physics or the math practice, but cannot pass VCLA because they're second language learners or they're, there's for whatever reason. And so any time that we can look to level the playing field between, like if they leave our program, they can go teach, have attempted the test and get licensed bypassing the testing. And so we feel like sometimes we're held more accountable than other programs. And we're doing all we can do to make as many teachers as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Well, let me just end with this. Our teachers cannot teach students who are hungry. Our teachers cannot teach students who are dealing with trauma at home. Our teachers cannot teach students in a building that is crumbling with mold on the ceiling. Our teachers cannot teach when a student is dealing with mental and behavioral health issues, or when that teacher themselves is facing any of those conditions. As part of our education policy, we need to bring, whether it's teacher licensure, but definitely around education funding and policy, we have to understand that that school building is a community where the students and the teachers and the administrators and the support personnel bring into that building everything they're dealing with at home. We need to have a system that recognizes that and meets those students where they are, to assess where they are for the purpose of meeting them where they are, to give them the skills that they need to get where we need them to be when they graduate. And we have to recognize, to use a track metaphor, since I did track in high school, not every student starts the race on the same block. Not every student has a hurdle-free path on that track. It is up to us as policymakers and policy implementers to recognize and address that. And only by doing that will we live up to the constitutional promise we give all of our families of a free, high-quality public education. And your role in that is just as critical, and in some cases more, than mine. So thank you again for your service.
Thank you. We appreciate it. All right, so moving on. Our next agenda item would be VDOE leadership updates. So I think you're up.
Is there a way to put? Maybe I can send it on there. Okay. Gently. All right. Thank you, Senator McClellan, for your remarks. And thank you, everybody, for having me here today. My name is Dickie Shaner. As I stated earlier, I'm Chief of Staff at the Virginia Department of Education. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And really wanted to just kind of add on to the Senator's remarks about that, that implementation piece, because it is so important, and not even from sort of that General Assembly perspective, but we get initiatives and things to implement from the governor or the secretary or the superintendent. And somebody has to carry those things out. And a lot of what we're doing right now has to do with ABTEL and the Board of Education around teachers. And really, when it comes down to it in education, that's where the rubber meets the road, is with the teacher and the student in that classroom. So thank you for your service on ABTEL and what you do to help our students in the Commonwealth. So what I'll do today, I know we have a lot on the agenda, is I just want to kind of touch on some of the more visible or more talked about initiatives that we're working on at the VDOE with the board, with the secretary, and with the governor's team, as well as the General Assembly. And the first is the Virginia Literacy Act, which I hope most of you have heard of by now, but that was just really a landmark piece of legislation that passed, and really focusing on early literacy with our students. And in partnership primarily with the University of Virginia, there is a lot of work going on related to early literacy, the science of reading, and the work is full steam ahead now with the department. Some of the bigger pieces that are ensuring that there are reading specialists out in the school divisions. Another big piece that school divisions are very interested in is this sort of curriculum approval that will be coming to the Board of Education soon in terms of what is appropriate science-based reading curriculum that will need to go through the Virginia Board of Education. So school divisions will have to work with their curriculum vendors and get through that process in order to use that curriculum. So that's an important piece of that Literacy Act that will be front and center in the months to come. Another initiative is Bridging the Gap. And that really is a learning loss initiative focused on how we can create a more productive dialogue with everybody involved in the school system, from parents to teachers to principals to school board members to community members. And some of the pieces of that are creating sort of these individualized learning plans that we both instruct and coach parents, that are also created by school division professionals. We have a pilot group right now that's working on creating a sort of a template for this individual learning plan, and really having that be sort of a touchstone for productive discussions with a parent of a student who can look at that and see where their student is at and understand it, and be able to feel comfortable in going and talking to their student's teacher or perhaps the principal about where their child is and what can be done to improve that student's academic performance or school experience overall. So really, when I think about bridging the gap, it's learning loss, but I think it's also bridging a gap in terms of really empowering parents to engage in their students' academic experience and with those professionals that are teaching the child every day. Lab schools is another big item that we work on a lot and talk about a lot. And this past session, there was $100 million appropriated towards lab schools. And a bulk of that money starts with offering sort of funding for planning grants for lab schools. And we received several applications at this point where higher ed institutions are partnering with school divisions to look at getting some funding for a planning grant to eventually start a lab school. We've even received one full application for a lab school at this point. So we have an internal review committee that will look at those applications and make recommendations to a standing committee, which is approved by the president of the Board of Education. And then that standing committee, like you all, will make recommendations to the board for ultimate approval of these different items with lab schools. But it's exciting to see the amount of interest we're seeing already with lab schools, in particularly with the planning grant applications. Executive Directive 3, that hits squarely on what everyone in this room is doing, and that's about teacher workforce. And the governor just signed that recently. And really, it's about addressing teacher shortages and different ways that we can do that as a Commonwealth. Some of the items in that executive directive are looking at how can we engage both out-of-state teachers and retired teachers to get into our workforce, into our school divisions and teach. I hope you've all seen the Becoming a Teacher website. Has everybody seen that at this point? I hope. We're excited about that. If you haven't, it's becomeateacher.virginia.gov. And that's really just sort of a portal that we've put out there to everyone to try to recruit people and teachers or help existing teachers navigate the system. Another thing we're doing related to Executive Directive 3 is working with the Virginia retirement system because there are some impediments in place related to individuals who have retired and trying to recruit them back into the teacher workforce that we need to get past those hurdles. Speaking of track metaphors. And so that's something we're actively working with VRS on. Another thing is working with the Department of Finance, the Department of Labor to reduce red tape related to teacher licensure, to recruit more teachers into teaching. And that's a big process, you know, and it's a balancing act of reducing bureaucracy and hurdles, but also ensuring high quality teachers are entering our school divisions and our classrooms. And then targeting grants that we have to the highest and most persistent teacher vacancy rates in school divisions. And we have a lot of grants right now working on various issues related to that. So I'll name a few of them, and we're using some of our ESSER 3 money, which is that sort of that third tranche of COVID relief money to fund some of these grant programs. And we have grants to support provisionally licensed teachers and pre-service education candidates seeking full licensure in Virginia with our Praxis grant for their Praxis exams. We have a continuing education and support grant. We'll call it the CES grant. We have a recruitment and retention support grant. And all these are offered to support division employees completing assessments and higher education coursework necessary for licensure, and just trying to get some incentives out there as well. And just to give you an idea of how much money we've put out and who it's touching right now, that Praxis grant, there's been about 81,000 that we've given out to 10 divisions. The CES grant is close to 1.5 million with 15 divisions. And the recruitment and retention grant, it's been about 1.2 million and about 41 divisions served. So those are just continuing, and we're getting out there, trying to get that funding out there to help. We also have some paid internship scholarship programs, some residency collaboratives, which are really, really neat programs with partnering with higher eds and particularly HBCUs with that program. And so a lot going on in that regard, I would say. And then just to finish out that Executive Directive 3 piece, you know, apprenticeships was a big piece of that Executive Directive 3. And there's been $3 million in those ESSER 3 funds committed to, you know, planning grants to school divisions who have partnered with EPPs to help inform the apprenticeship program development. So trying to create these apprenticeship programs for people to enter the teacher workforce. All right, two pieces of legislation that we have working groups that we're working on right now. House Bill 585, which is more of an extended timeline. We're actually just getting started on that work right now, but that's really the General Assembly asking us to look at our assessment system and really analyze what are we doing good, what needs to be changed, and eventually give a report back to the General Assembly on some recommendations on what, if anything, we can do to improve our state assessment system. And so, like I said, that work is just in its infancy, but I think it will take a lot of stakeholder feedback and a lot of input over the course of the next year to really get at a good work product to deliver to the General Assembly related to assessment. Then there's House Bill 938, which has a much more rapid timeline. In fact, a report is due from VDOE to the General Assembly at the end of this month. And this one has a lot of different topics related to recommendations around accreditation, math instruction, advanced studies diplomas. I mean, it is a lot of different topics, and it was in a very quick timeline. So we convened a group of stakeholders. The legislation actually prescribed who should be included: parents, teachers, superintendents, principals, higher ed, et cetera. Got them together, facilitated that work. Now I know they're trying to work on that report and get it done in a timely manner. So that will be some recommendations on key education topics going to the General Assembly here in the next month. So there's also some different tutoring initiatives that have been announced recently by the governor and the Secretary of Education that we're working on standing up and getting those moving. But again, towards that learning loss piece, how can we use some of these pandemic relief dollars that we've received to provide individualized supports to students to help get past some of the learning loss that occurred during the COVID closure. So those are other big initiatives that we have. And with that, Dr. Johnson, I think, or actually Madam Chair, I think that's really all I wanted to touch on today, and we'll be happy to try to answer any questions too.
We have any questions?
Hi, good morning.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Good morning, Dickie. I have two questions, if I may. The first is, you mentioned that the Department of Labor, Department of Finance, Secretary of Finance are working on reducing regulatory hurdles for entering the teaching profession. I was just wondering how that work will take advantage of the wisdom of this group, ABTEL, and their role in teacher licensure. Are you anticipating bringing those recommendations here to be vetted, or to have a work group working with ABTEL, or what's the expected process on that?
Yeah, thanks, Ann. And, you know, I think ABTEL certainly is going to play a role in a lot of this stuff because a lot of these regulations feed up to the board for approval. So I don't know, Dr. Johnson, if you have anything you want to add to that, but yeah, I think ABTEL will be involved in those discussions.
Thank you. And then my second question, following up on Mr. White's question to Delegate Senator McClellan earlier, the work on can you give this group just a brief introduction to what the administration is thinking about cut scores and about changing accountability and accreditation systems such that they know how that may eventually have implications for teacher licensure?
Sure, thank you. I know at this this board meeting this week, actually, I believe there's a presentation again on accountability and accreditation. And, you know, as I understand it right now, there will be just sort of informational sessions with the board and suggestions around, you know, what does an accountability and accreditation system look like optimally? You know, what should a board be considering? What should a state be considering when looking at really school accountability? And so I know there was an expert last month at the board. I think there'll be an expert this week at the board to just talk about that and Virginia's system. And then as well with cut scores, you know, there's been a lot of discussion just around NAEP and where Virginia sits in terms of the rigor of cut scores in Virginia versus the rest of the nation. And so I know the board will be having discussions on that as well going forward. So I think those two topics will be probably discussed at just about every board meeting here into the near future. So I think that that's a big topic for the state as a whole that will sort of center on the Board of Education's work in the coming months.
And will that include is it your anticipation that the administration will be bringing to the board recommendations to implement the governor's stated goal of dramatically changing the cut scores in time for the spring 23 test administration?
Yeah, I don't know what specifics or the timing will be, but I do know that there will be a lot of discussions around timing. What is the accreditation system going to measure, you know, and cut scores. So I do think those will be front and center. But I don't know in terms of exactly what the timelines and specifics will be of that.
Any other questions?
Not so much a question. As you all start looking at the assessments and looking at cut scores, I think it's going to be important that you look at the narrative that's being put out there because it is hurting teachers. I know in my division, when teachers hear, it seems like there's an attack on education. And they are doing all that they can to recover from the pandemic, and our scores are showing it. It's evidence of recovery, but that's not part of the narrative. I think it's important that when you look at how you are moving forward with assessments, that is kept in mind, because it is disheartening to teachers and public educators who are doing their utmost best to improve and to grow. And I think that we have made great strides in doing that. Are we where we need to be yet? No, but we are moving forward and we are working to improve our student achievement, and we take that to heart.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important comment to always keep in mind is these state policy decisions and the impact they can have on those in the classrooms, in the schools and communities. So thank you.
Okay, any other feedback? Do you have anything?
And I'd just like to thank you personally.
thank you.
I know you're pitch hitting for Jillian today. Unfortunately, our state superintendent Balo has a conflicting, I think it's governor's
regional state superintendent
meetings on Mondays. And so she has offered to come if in the next sessions we could potentially have our meeting on another day. But again, thank you for pitching today and being with us. So appreciate you so much. Unfortunately, Ms. Kim Richley was unable to be with us, but she may come into the meeting, I believe, a little later. So we may hear some comments from her as well. So thank you. And I think we're going to do a little switching of the agenda so that we can keep one of our members and we will have quota. So if we can have, we're going to do a little flipping around with the agenda.
We're going to hold off on our career switcher presentation for just a little bit and go and have Maggie do item number 2. If you don't mind, Maggie, we're going to be looking at the review of proposed revisions to the licensure manual for the 10-year license.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. This morning, I bring to you item number 2, which is a two-parter. We are going to review amendments to the licensure regulations for school personnel and also make a recommendation for the 10-year license renewal manual. Before I get started, I do want to make a note that I have a typo on page 1, second sentence. The final guidelines were approved in XX 2022. That was I needed to make a note to go back and change that. The guidelines were approved in March 2021. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of that. The first part of this, again, is to make a technical change to the regulations. In its item J, on page 2 of the item, I have the language, proposed language, striking out a few words and adding a few. Individuals shall complete professional development in the topic areas aligned with performance standards for teachers, principals, and superintendents prescribed by the Board of Education. These are being recommended because in 2018, we did change the 5-year validity period to a 10-year validity period for the licenses. And in doing so, there was also an understanding that we would tie them to the performance standards for teachers. So we've kind of been in this process for a little bit of time. The evaluation guidelines, as you probably know, were under review and were approved back in 2021, adding another standard and cleaning up some language as well, making it so that the competencies of teacher evaluations would then come back into the renewals recertification points. We want to ensure that those evaluations have productive and constructive feedback, and then an ongoing growth plan for teachers. And so this has kind of been one big project that's been going on for a couple years now. So this is the alignment in the regulations, just to align it to the evaluations, and then a copy of the draft 10-year renewal manual buckets. I want to get into that in just a minute, but I wanted to see if there were any questions first on the technical amendment to the regulations. Okay. Yes, members have this in their packet. It's item number 2. Again, the proposed language is on page 2. One more, Jim. There you go. And again, just a technical amendment, just to align it with the performance standards. Does anybody have any questions on this portion of it?
So is this to remove, like, should there be like a module or something? Because it says when provided by the state. And so we're kind of moving away from that state provided training on these things and moving to more school board or, in-house school district training. Is that what the intention is?
No, I think I think when provided by the state wasn't clear about what renewal certification points were and how to get them.
Okay.
And so this is just clarifying that language so that we understand that the manual is going to be what's prescribed by the board
Okay. All right, that
to
makes
meet
sense.
those buckets.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Great. And then I'll move on to the draft manual, which was an attachment to the item. This again has been in work groups and discussed for our veteran members for a while now. I think we've seen this as far back as 2020. So a lot of things went into this as far as edits over the past couple of years, because there was added legislation for statutory requirements. There was additional work done on cleaning up language so that it was reflective of the standards, specifically, standards 1 through 8 and what they each said, and then going back through and also aligning the points to them. So under the 5-year license, the points were 180. For the 10-year, it will be 270. Statutory requirements in this manual are laid out with the points that are going to be assigned to those statutory requirements, because that wasn't done in the original 5-year. So divisions are already very clear on the 5 points for emergency CPR, AED, first aid, child abuse, dyslexia. Special education training was new this year. That had to be added to the manual. Cultural competency training that was added a couple of years ago, prescribed by the board, but it will go into effect July 1 of next year. School counselor training, the civics endorsement, 5 points. And the only one that doesn't have the points to be assigned yet is the African-American history training, because we have not yet had the module approved for publication on that. So we expect that it'll be another 5 points. It's a free training. It'll be provided by the department, and a link will be put on the website. We also changed the buckets. So while the activity types are the same, you can still get college credit. You can still go to professional development conferences. You can still do modules type things. You can still mentor. You can still write a book. All of those options are still the same, but we've changed the buckets. And again, these buckets are aligned with the 8 standards in the evaluation, the teacher evaluations that we did 2 years ago now. Any questions about the manual? Hey, David. And before David asks this question, I do want to say we are in the process of not only a new website update, but as most of you guys know, we do have an online application portal now. And so this manual is not going to be something that folks have to, download and then the application is at the back of it. This is kind of like the user guide so that when they go into the portal, if they want to go through and look at it, that's fine. Divisions can use this as a handbook and as a guide, but it's not going to be, front and center. We're not going to verbatim put this entire thing on those pages, kind of like what you see now. But go ahead, David.
And thank you so much. And I shared some of the information.
Yes,
prior to-
all of it was incorporated.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. And again, this is coming from superintendents. I sent a Google Doc out there asking for their solicitation. The big thing that came back is the only 60 points for professional conferences. They were asking if those could be increased, especially superintendents. We do a lot, at professional conferences. And they were saying if that could be increased. And then the other question that came up, and this is out of Region 8, a statewide system to track recertification points.
Yes, thank you. First, let me go back to the first one though. Let me go back to professional conferences. So professional conferences, do you mean the maximum points raised for attending or presenting?
Well, what they've said here is consider more than 60 points.
As the maximum.
Yes, for participation, and I'm not sure how you do each one of those, but participation in professional conferences. And that's where a lot of us get our professional development from.
So the from what I understand, my experience and background on the discussion on this, and our veterans, please tell me if I'm wrong here. Presentation would be 15 points per topic presentation and 5 points per day for participation, just if you just attend. They don't all have to be allotted to option 2. They can go to option 8, that's fine, which is kind of like the other bucket of other professional development activities, but we wanted to really cap off that presentation at 15 points so that it was,
So you can still get points.
absolutely, absolutely. But for right here, for the allocations, we just wanted to make sure that, we kept this at 60 and then we had that optional bucket at the end. Mhm.
I was just saying, thank you. That was the consideration that they asked about.
Okay.
So there is another place they can drop.
Yes,
those points in
absolutely. Yeah, we
towards their
absolutely can
recertification.
take those points in the option 8 for participation and for presentation. We just wanted to cap those presentation points. Shelby?
I had a question about 2 of the statutory requirements. For
Okay.
the special ed, I know there are 2 trainings. Are they 5 points each or 5 points total for both?
They are 5 points for the training. You have to take the 2 modules.
And
It's
that's
5 points for the
total 5.
total. Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
And the other question, I know it's not up and running yet, but the training that's coming for African American history, will that only be for those holders of the history social science endorsement, or does it match all of the endorsements that require the civics module?
No, it is only for the secondary history and social sciences endorsement. Thank you for that question.
Thank
Yep.
you.
So that will mean for higher ed as well. It could be used for higher ed as well.
So that will, once it's approved, would be available for higher ed if they chose to use it.
Yes.
For secondary.
Yeah, and a lot of higher eds are already embedding that into their programs. I did want to address David's second point, and now it's completely lost. Thank you, statewide tracking. Thank you. So the new licensure system, as I was at VASPA last week, and bless the licensure contacts in the division because they have been so incredibly patient with us. As I've explained, the online portal that we currently have is a Band-Aid. And we are anticipating moving to a new vendor sometime in the spring. This new vendor is going to have different options for us that's going to allow for tracking of professional development. Our current system, which is the Band-Aid, will not allow for that. Hence going to this new vendor, one of the pain points that we've had. And so it's gonna allow The new vendor is going to allow for divisions to still have a little bit of management over their employees and work on behalf of their employees in that system. And they'll be able to look at the professional development that folks upload there. Now, as you know, every division's a little bit differently. I know Shelby's division has a transcript system. They've got, they send in their transcripts and then of their professional development certificates, and they've got a whole thing that they can print out. Others divisions really rely on us or the teacher to keep track of it. So it's really going to be important for the teacher, if they've earned professional development in their division, to upload their transcript to our tracking. But we do anticipate that there'll be a little bit of back and forth there where the division is going to be able to see what other folks have uploaded. That's also going to help our folks who are currently not employed by a school division. They're going to be able to continue to put up their professional development. And then if and when they get employed by a division, the division would be able to see that we've actually accepted and approved certain points that they've done.
Her team for that innovation. The other plug I'm going to put in, since we've got some critical folks in the room, this is funded. The system that she's speaking of is funded by our state and General Assembly. And so we are continuing to thank them for that appropriation and for more, because the systems, as you can imagine with COVID, are increasingly costly. And so that has been the challenge, that we have not had the funding to have a system like Maggie is visioning for us in the Commonwealth. So again, just a plug there. If you see a new request for new funding or the online licensure system, yes, stamp it, yes.
Okay, any other comments or feedback for Maggie on the licensure manual? It's nice to see it come to fruition. We've watched this for a long time. And so to see, to get things to where we're ready to move forward with it, I think is really great. And the online licensure system is amazing. So we appreciate that as well.
It's only a Band-Aid.
I know, but it is still a huge,
yeah, but it is. We have never had that. So
our students in the past had to write checks and bring them to it. Like we were really like 1980 licensure for a long time. And so it's really, we've made huge leaps and bounds. So any other comments? If not, our goal is to make a recommendation to the Board of Education to approve the amendments to the licensure regulations for school personnel in the Virginia Licensure Renewal Manual. Do I have a motion? Jessica Jones. And Steve Whitten, second. So Maggie, your manual's approved. Yay. And we had a quorum to vote on it. Okay, so now we will hop back up in the agenda to the Career Switcher Accelerated Alternative Pathways Recruitment and Retention Series. And I think we have quite a few guests here for that. So if you would like to come up and share that with us.
That's fine. Good morning, everyone. My name is Missy Ogden, and I am the Director of the Career Switcher program that is nested in the community college system. I am here today speaking on behalf of my 4 other colleagues who are directors within the, who each have roles as directors of Career Switcher programs at their respective universities. Just to give you a quick background on Career Switchers for those of you who are not familiar, our candidates come to us with specific prerequisites that they have to have met before they can apply to a Career Switcher program. And this is a distinction between your Career Switcher and your provisionally licensed teacher. Our Career Switchers have to have already passed their praxis and their VCLA and have at least 3 years of full-time work experience. So just to give you that distinction in case you weren't aware, forgive me, I got up here all of a sudden and got a little nervous. So tell you a little bit about the Educate VA program first, and then I'm going to speak about each of the other 4 programs. Our program is offered in a hybrid format. So we like the face-to-face piece, but we also understand that we're talking about working individuals. 90% of our candidates are working full-time, they have families and that kind of thing as they're coming through this program. So we find that employing both online instruction as well as face-to-face is very important. We offer the program twice a year, so it's an 18-week semester. They either come through in the fall or they come through in the spring. And during that time, they are with us for 7 class sessions, so that's face-to-face. And then they are also completing 7 courses. We use Canvas as our online learning platform in the community colleges. And we have this multi-layered, if you will, cohort model. So we bring them all together in one location for our first and last class of the semester. And so that's when they're all together from all over the state of Virginia. We also use the community college locations, and that's where they're together regionally. So we have our Northern Virginia group, our Southwest Virginia group, our Tidewater group, and so on. And then we group them based on content area as well. When we come back together after they've been hired, they come into level 2. These are our sitting teachers. They have a career switcher license. That is another layer of a cohort, because those are individuals who may, just an example this year, have come through level 1 of the career switcher program in 2008 or in 2022. Okay, next slide. Oh, it's okay. Okay. So we do have 8 locations for our students to report to. So ideally, we are getting people across the state through the program, preparing them, and they are within about 2 hours of home. So that makes it a little bit more accessible for them. Our program focuses on the middle and high school endorsements outside of course, world languages and health and PE. And one of the other things that we do that distinguishes us a bit is that we get into every single level 2 teachers' classrooms to offer support and feedback. So I have an assistant director, Dr. Stephanie Moore. Either one or the other of us are getting into every single classroom. So I think at this point, this year we have about 80 level 2 teachers. In my time with the program, I've had as many as 162 first-year teachers that we have supported in a classroom. And finally, because we are nested in the community college system, and thanks to our General Assembly, the Workforce Credentials Grant that was written into the state budget back in 2015 allows our candidates to come through. If they're permanent residents of Virginia, it reduces the tuition, so it makes it very affordable for them at $1,330. So I believe our next slide is going to be about Old Dominion University. My colleague Lisa Temple is here with us today. Old Dominion University is the original career switcher program. They were the pilot model. They're also the first program to have offered elementary education, and they are still only one of 2 who are able to do that. And some distinguishing things about Old Dominion is that they offer the program 3 times a year. They do have a summer intensive 7-week session, but they have, since the pandemic, they've gone from all face-to-face instruction to offering an online or virtual option as well. So you can see their format, fall, spring, and summer. And we've all included our average enrollment, just so that you're aware of that as well. Next slide. My colleague, Dr. Whiting, is here with us from Regent University. Regent University was the first to have an all online format for their students. They have multiple starting points during the year, so they're able to capture candidates at I think 6 different times of year. They also are the only program to have a career switcher program that tracks into the master's program as an option for the career switchers. And so you'll see Dr. Whiting has shared his enrollment. So you'll see that he's got 40 who are just beginning coursework, but 33 of those are going to track on to the master's program. And they also offer, like the ODU program, a very fast track. So candidates can extend things out, or they can complete everything in the coursework phase within 3 months. My colleague Denny Keffer is here today representing Shenandoah University. Shenandoah is the program that does everything face-to-face. So they bring their candidates on campus weeknights, weekends, and they do everything over the course of about 22 weeks. And so their They really believe in bringing these people into the classroom and providing them with face-to-face instruction. You can see that they break things out into modules to cover all of the requirements. They also like to get we all have to have a practicum placement, so 30 to 40 hours in a classroom with a cooperating teacher. And Denny always likes to point out that his teachers who are being prepared are actually teaching for 30 hours in a classroom when they are doing their practicum placement. Next slide. The Shenandoah program has 3 different campuses. So Fredericksburg, Leesburg, and Winchester. So they're able to meet different regional needs because they are spread out across those 3 campuses. And current enrollment, and we've all seen a little bit of a dip in enrollment, not just our traditional prep programs, but the career switcher programs as well. Next slide. And finally, Virginia Commonwealth University, Cassandra Stanley is here with us today representing VCU. They are the newest of the programs. They have just recently been approved to fast track and do a 5-month program, but they also have a 9-month option. And they've also gone to an online format. And their focus is on, next slide, urban environment. So serving the needs of rural and urban high poverty communities. And they also focus largely on the secondary endorsement areas. I think that's everything, just to give you an overview. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them, or if you have them of my colleagues about their specific programs, I'm sure we can answer individually. Yes, ma'am.
For the lovely presentation. I noticed under Shenandoah University, as well as VCU, we had all CTE areas except for agricultural education.
That's because there are specific requirements for someone seeking an agriculture endorsement. And it's coursework, and it is, Maggie, correct me if I'm wrong, but they have to actually have a degree in agriculture. It can't be done by praxis.
Correct.
Yes.
But one of the things that I do know, because there's about 335 of us and we're still trying to grow, is there opportunity at these 2 institutions to maybe look in going in that direction? And let me take this to Maggie.
Thank you for your question. So as Missy said, the praxis test is typically what is one of the prerequisites for getting into these programs. And as she mentioned, we don't have a prescribed praxis test for agriculture. I've been in conversations with Virginia Tech, who are looking to expand their CTE program to add this agriculture. We know that most of our agriculture teachers do come from that area and come from that program. They've got different programs like animal sciences, forestry, those types of things. But when you look at the ag ed requirements, it's all over the place. And so those folks who have animal sciences or just forestry typically have additional coursework to do. So they're really looking to expand their program to career switchers. And so I think you'll see that over the course of the next year, but I know that they are looking into that.
Thank you. And the other piece I was going to raise is that I was supposed to set them up really, so my apologies, but just to emphasize some vocabulary. I know we've got a lot of new members this year. And so I wanted to emphasize this is one of our series, as we've talked about, for recruitment and retention, making us all aware of what's being done in the Commonwealth and models for doing it well. And so just to highlight that the 5 career switcher programs that you've been introduced to today are the 5 recognized by the VDOE as the alternate model. So again, oftentimes we hear about the alternate models. This is one of several, but this is the one program with 4 or 5 minimum competencies that all of these programs share. And so keeping in mind that really the individuals that do pursue this have a unique need, right? And typically come with a lot of life experience and can be successful with admission on the assessments. Right? And then they are receiving typically the professional studies, preparation, and the clinicals, the based in the schools, understanding about the profession in general, again, the focus on those professional studies. And so the content is really demonstrated before they enter their programs, and thus the 5 months or the online where you're working through the clinicals in their various divisions, wherever they are in the state of Virginia. But again, I wanted to make sure we're connecting as we talk about alternate programs, as we talk about the accelerated tracks, that we can hear and make those connections. And again, this is one of the model programs in our Commonwealth for preparation in these alternate tracks. So if individuals already have a master's degree, a PhD, those are the types of individuals that could be very successful upfront quickly and seeking the pedagogy or the how to teach piece. And so we wanted to put that out, promote those exemplary programs. Oftentimes our career switching programs may be some of the most misunderstood in our Commonwealth. So we want to make sure people see that how they're meeting the rigor of preparation in an accelerated, often because they're coming to those programs with skills already. So want to expand, of course, but acknowledging that typically they are coming with skills already and then receiving that pedagogy and the clinicals in a very accelerated manner. So typically someone, for example, Mervyn, your program can finish this in Lisa in the summer, correct? And now at VCU, 3-4 months in preparation for the September start. So a little publicity there and marketing for you all as well. Any other comments from those that are here? Glad you all are here and thank you for coming to Richmond today. Any comments from you all?
Dr. Johnson, may I make 2 more points? I'm so sorry. Also, just as a point, since 2018, the career switcher programs have been able to help out our provisionally licensed teachers who are in their first year of the license. And so that has proven to be very beneficial. We had 9 candidates come through our cohort last spring who were sitting teachers in a classroom, and they were able to meet all of their licensure requirements while they were teaching. And so that's kind of nice because they didn't have to go out and find all those courses on their own. And additionally, they had the support of classmates and instructors as they were teaching. And finally, I'll just point out that Dr. White, I thought you had a question, but I was just going to say that we actually have a math teacher in your high school at King William, and she was extremely successful last year. So we do have, I think this semester or this year, we've got candidates, level 2 candidates who are in over 30 school divisions. Dr. Whiting, did you have a comment?
I was just going to ask if Virginia State program. I was going to say you may want to reach out to Virginia State because they have an ag program in their ed.
And Dr. Whiting, did you have a comment?
Yes, please. We've heard a lot this morning about the 2 words recruit and retain. And I'd just like to touch on those briefly, if I may. And the other way around, retain. Career switchers have a higher retention rate in the classroom than traditionally prepared teachers. And I think that's worth sharing with you all, because if we recruit a lot of teachers in the traditional method, at least half of them statistically leave after 2 or 3 years. I'm sure you all are aware of that. Conversely, career switchers have a retention rate of about 84%. And 3 years ago, we did some research of our own career switchers, and their retention rate was 87%, having been teaching from between 3 and 5 years. So if you are a school division person and you're hiring, please do look at career switchers favorably for that reason, but also because if you are a school division hirer and you have a person come to you who says, excuse me, I'm good at maths, but I don't have any teaching qualifications, but you have a slot or several slots for math teachers, you can say to that person, good, welcome aboard. You can start on Monday because we have a slot in the high school down the road. But also the human resources person or the hirer produces, as well as a provisional license, produces a piece of paper and gives it to Jimmy and said, well, Jimmy, here are 13 courses that you have got to acquire over the next 3 years. Well, Jimmy, like the rest of us, just puts it back in his pocket and says, thank you very much, forgets all about them. And so quite often those people are wasted as well because they don't get the courses in the requisite amount of time and they fall by the wayside, or they start panicking after 2.5 years and to get the courses. The career switchers have to take their courses right away. And so as well as starting teaching next week, whatever it happens to be, they are starting professional development courses with one of us here. And so straight away, they are learning classroom management. They're learning assessment techniques, whereas the traditionally prepared person, his courses are still locked away in his pocket. So it's not a commercial for career switchers, but I've just thought I'd add that on behalf of my colleagues so that you have more of an understanding of what we provide for VDOE. Thank you.
Andy has a question, yeah. Is there a microphone here?
Somebody talk about the accreditation processes of career switchers program.
Andy asked about the certification process for career switchers because there are 5 in the state, and it is a lengthy process. I am sure that they're all nodding their heads back there. The career switcher programs have to have their competencies aligned with the approved program regulations. And so they satisfy the content typically with that praxis. We do have some that do the elementary as well, so they do have some content in there. But then the professional studies do have to align with the approved program regulations. And so there is a panel that reviews that. Typically, staff will look at the application first. They'll make sure that it's pretty, strong, tight, has everything in it that they need. It's all spelled out. A lot of times we know what they mean, but if somebody just came and looked at the document, they may not. So we do ask them to spell everything out very specifically. There's a narrative and outline in the matrix that go along with it. And then they do get recertified every few years. And so they still have to send in, and it's basically the same process. It's reviewed, a panel is convened to ensure that all the competencies are met. And then they also do the annual report. So they send in an annual report to us as well.
The national accreditation.
CAPE.
CAPE falls under that too.
Mm-hmm.
So they go through CAPE accreditation.
They're not reviewed by CAPE, but the programs are CAPE, the institutes.
Okay, the institution. Okay,
Yes.
that makes sense. Yes.
But not the community college, but the other institutions are. So accreditation doesn't really relate to the VDOE's career switcher program.
Correct.
She mentioned certificate.
Certified.
So it's clarifying the terminology.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other comments or questions for our guests? Thank you for sharing that. It's always, we can't make enough teachers. It's nice to know that we've got lots of different opportunities for doing that. We are now moving on to written reports. Am I correct? As we bounced around our agenda, we'll make sure I'm staying on target. I believe Maggie's back up. Nope, you're just getting your steps in. That's all. It's good.
I am going to be joined by Brian Mott, the Executive Director for Virtual Virginia. And Joan, I'm going to just take this off for just a second so that I can get him to his login and he can log in while I'm talking.
Okay, great.
So this presentation is actually just a follow-up, and it's a very informal presentation. There's no deck. He's actually going to just walk you through the platform. So this has actually been on the books again for many years, micro-credentials. Most of our IHEs and professional development folks are very aware of what this is. So back in let me make sure I get this right. Back in 2019, this board got together a work group that basically looked at the national standards and what other states were doing as far as offering of micro-credentials and how it looked for professional development. Over the years, that has also kind of evolved into not only professional development, but also creating stacks so that teachers can get endorsements from these. And so Virginia actually only has, there's one instance of computer science that we're looking at for a stack that would get the endorsement in computer science, but also the Virginia Literacy Act from last year has also got a component in there for reading specialists. If they complete a stack of micro-credentials, then they could get the reading specialist endorsement. So over the years, work groups have been convened to define what a micro-credential is, what it will look like for Virginia, and also to roll out a pilot program. So it was originally mandated for computer science, like I said. So we enlisted the help of Virtual Virginia to kind of create this platform based on ABTEL's recommendations on what it is and what it's going to look like. And so their pilot program actually is going to finish up this spring. So again, the first report to the General Assembly was done in 2019. In 2020, we actually did another report that said this is what the plan is. Over the past year, we've actually implemented the plan as a pilot, and then Brian's going to kind of walk us through what their platform looks like. And again, there's no action on this. It's just kind of an update, but wanted you to kind of see what micro-credentials is going to look like in the state, because we really wanted to use computer science as a foundation for everything that comes after. So I will give it over to Brian.
Thank you, Maggie. Good morning, everybody. I'm Brian Mott, Executive Director of Virtual Virginia. I know many people here, some of you are new, so if you have any questions, you know I just like talking. Just please speak up. As Maggie mentioned, this has been an ongoing program. It's really in the tail end of its pilot phase, and micro-credentials have, in 2020, even become more important now in 2022 as we go into 2023. More industries are doing credentialing. K through 12, we need to follow that, right? We need to make sure that our teachers have the same opportunities and access, even more opportunities and access that were envisioned in 2020 when the pilot kicked off. So what we found was when we started this, things simply weren't organized, right? There was a great idea behind micro-credentials, but there wasn't a singular space where teachers and providers could go to get linked together. And if there was, it was all out there. It was just scattered, right? Every provider was doing their own individual offering. Teachers didn't really have clear direction of who was approved and for what. So we wanted to just clarify that and unmuddy some of the waters. So what we've done is, here's the environment you'll see before you is like the BCCS. We use Canvas in Virginia as a statewide learning management system through Virtual Virginia, providing a space for students and educators across the state to organize their learning. And again, our educators aren't any different in that space. We need to organize learning for them as well. So I'll go back to the homepage, just show you briefly. We've created 2 spaces on the learning management system. Oops, pardon me. To log back in. I am using a demo account here, so you can't see my stuff. 2 spaces, one for educators, one for providers. And these are just demo spaces for now. There'll be a different pathway to enter, a different portal when the system is final in the spring. But we just wanted to show you how we've clarified and cleared some things up. One of the biggest clarifications was, what is a micro-credential? That was one of the biggest questions we found. Thankfully, as I mentioned, since 2020, some of that work has been done for us. The CCSSO has done a rubric, and that's the National Chief Leaders in each state, of what is a micro-credential. So when we talk about things like reciprocity and recognition between states, we actually do have a common thread rubric that we can lean into in that space. And thankfully, they made that Creative Commons, so we are able to grab some of that information and use it here. So a common definition of a micro-credential, what they are and what they are not. So if you are an organization who's interested in providing a micro-credential, you can look right off the bat and see, do we meet the criteria in Virginia? We also provided steps for approval. Part of the organizational process was identifying a approval and offering process. And we followed other credentialing organizations in their methods and provided 4 steps. The first is a self-review where you can access the rubric and say, does our organization's offering meet what a micro-credential is in the Commonwealth? Let's do an internal review first and see if we do. The second is an official review by Virtual Virginia. Pardon me, it's skipping ahead there. And then we will simply score it against that one rubric that CCSSO created. And that third-party review is the department. It will then be passed to Maggie's office, where subject matter experts will review it and say, is this credential evaluating the competency it says it is? And once approved, it's then available to educators on a catalog and then annually renewed. Let us know if it changes. Those were the biggest challenges when trying to organize micro-credential offerings. How do you approve them? How do you review them? What's the standardized rubric? So as a provider, we've clarified how do you get your micro-credential offered through the Commonwealth. And here's an outline of those steps as well. That self-review is no cost, obviously. We provide that rubric. Organizations can stand up their credential against that rubric and see if they meet the criteria. Step 2 is that 2-part review, first by Virtual Virginia, saying does it meet the criteria to be a micro-credential, second by the VDOE for its subject matter merit, and then third is that annual review where you have to let us know if it changes, right? And thankfully, once it's offered through the annual review, the participant journey has also been clarified as well. So are there any questions about, I'll go into the participant journey in just a minute. How does a teacher actually earn a credential? Any questions about the provider pathway to offering these to educators in the state? Okay, great. That's simple. That was the goal, to simplify this, and I think we have. Use that standardized national rubric, and again, give providers a simple pathway to make their credentialing opportunity available to educators. Now, if I'm an educator, how do I do this? There was so much confusion before. Do I just go out to an offerer, do this independently? How do I just show that I have a badge? It's very disorganized. So our goal here was to organize it as well. So simple steps for educators. I'm an educator, I have interest. Interest is step 1 in a micro-credential, either for recertification or for the add-on endorsement piece for the purposes of this pilot. Give a moment here. Step 2, the educator enrolls through the micro-credential provider. They go to them and say, look, I'm interested. I want to know what's approved. Once I find something approved, I just go and enroll with them. So we are not involved in the enrollment process. We are involved in the connecting the educator to what's approved. And step 3 is the educator completes that micro-credential through that provider, and a badge is awarded, the digital badge, the all-important badge. Now, the badging piece is where the provider does work with Virtual Virginia. We have a certification and badging system built into the statewide learning management system. They simply share their badge with us, let us know through a CSV upload who has completed it, and the badge is awarded. All that metadata is transferred then to Maggie's office and licensure as well. So now we've cleared up the kind of the Wild West of micro-credentialing. We give providers a pathway. We connect the K-12 educators with those providers, and that badging system is unified as well, all done under one system. And here's how it would look for the educators. I showed you the provider space. The educator space is just as simple. Essentially, if you're an educator in the state, you log into Canvas, which you already have access to, all of them in the state do. You enroll in this course with one mouse click. This is just a sample demo site. You click on the view the current micro-credential offerings available in your subject area. And we will update that list as they're renewed and new providers are added. And this is scalable as well. When you talk about long-term, this is going to start in computer science and STEM in the spring, but you talk about down the road, if we want to have a space for different credentialing, different add-ons, different professional learning opportunities, it's all organized in one space and updated with one mouse click and shared out to the state. Okay, so that was our goal, was 2 pathways, one for providers and one for educators. Any questions about the process? Because feedback's important here. As Maggie mentioned, the pilot is kind of coming to an end. We want to hear from you all. If there's anything you all have concerns about or want to see as we go forward, we're really giving you an update on the project, and feedback is important during this for us.
I will say it's nice to see that there's a path towards what is a micro, because so long it's like we hear about it, but what is it? And so to have a rubric and a site that we can go to look at. I know one of the concerns that I have heard widely is the reading specialist, that we go from getting a master's in reading specialist, especially with the focus on literacy, to doing modules and getting an add-on endorsement. So I wonder if you can maybe speak to that. What does that reading specialist micro-credentialing look like?
We're concerned too. A lot of times we get legislation that says you're going to do this, right? So then we've got to build a program around it. Our literacy folks at the department are still building out what that looks like as far as what the Virginia Literacy Act looks like and what that micro-credential looks like. And so we're really relying on them. We're not all content experts. We will have a panel. I know Brian said that it'll get sent over to Maggie's office to do the subject matter review, but really it's a combination of John L's office and my office, because all of that has to align to the approved programs. We have to make sure that the competencies are met. It's just in an alternate way. So John L's team will also be involved. My team will also be involved, and we'll likely even have to have some type of third party that comes in to ensure that the crosswalk is there, just because of the capacity issues in our office. So we haven't gotten to the point where we know what it's going to look like yet, because the literacy folks are still working out what it means for them. Our licensure piece to this point has just been to ensure that the testing requirement has been done, which we did with the reading praxis a couple meetings ago.
And remember that the act is effective 22-23. As you remember the act is effective 22-23 for reading. So they're just really going through this model to really, as you can see, it's really about the process and piloting the process. And we are working, as Maggie has indicated, with our literacy team, really as the content experts, and then working over the beginning of 23, really to gather some more specifics about how to build a reading alternate. Pretty much it will be an alternate route to becoming the licensure specialist.
And I do want to, there's been a lot of talk about alternate routes to licensure. And I do want to say one thing about that, because one of the words that was used in the media for Hanover, who has an alternate route to licensure, was the word circumvent. And I didn't like the word circumvent, because Hanover did not circumvent anything. I want to be very clear to everybody that alternate routes, folks still have to meet the competencies of the approved program. They're just doing it in a different way. So we're going to use that same type of review it model that we would with our alternate route programs with these micro-credentials and these endorsement areas. We have to make sure that those competencies are covered. Otherwise, our teachers aren't going to be prepared. Content is king, and that's what those endorsements do. When you come into the classroom, we have to ensure that teachers are qualified to teach that content when they come into the classroom if they get a provisional license, like, for other programs.
I will say that the word circumvent comes from more than the testing more than anything, because if they come through our program
Yes.
and they can't pass tests, so we can't admit them, they can leave our program, get hired provisionally, and because they've attempted the test, if they get that approved, if they're put forward for a license, they can circumvent the testing. And that is where we're put at a disadvantage. So that word is appropriate for that situation.
For that
And I think
situation.
the provisionally hired teachers are often the ones that end up, and we've had fabulous people in our programs who were like, I'm sorry, we cannot admit you because you haven't been able to pass this hurdle. They go get hired. We've really had a hand in preparing them, but they do circumvent the testing and get licensure. And so it does, I can see where that word comes from.
And also to that, like the career switchers and Hanover situation, they're specifically targeting already provisionally licensed teachers, which means they've already met the content requirements with the praxis. They've taken the praxis, they've taken the BCLA, they've taken the reading praxis as well if they needed it. So,
right. And
yeah.
but that's, I know that's where that word comes from.
Yeah.
And truthfully, it's appropriate in that situation. Any other comments or questions? I'm excited to see where micro-credentialing goes, not so much for licensure, but for other areas, I think it's a great opportunity. Any other thoughts?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so next up is liaison reports, I believe. Do we have Dan Lewis, Virginia Community College System?
I don't have anything to report, thanks to Missy Ogden's career switch.
Did she take your thunder? Okay.
Again, I don't know if you need to make an introduction because I have people that are here that don't know, but your report. It's found on your report every week.
So this, yeah.
Thank you. So I work closely with Missy Ogden in terms of getting the report from the community colleges in terms of the career switcher program. And we do a report out each ABTEL meeting. And I don't know how long this has been in place, but anyway, we just give you all updates on an annual basis.
Do we have a Chev report today?
Morning, everyone. I have 2 points to report on today. The Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs, Gear Up, is run by Chev. And this year, there's a college access initiative, Level Up Virginia. Chev is working with Vantage Point Consulting to craft a statewide college access strategy, action plan, and outreach campaign. And so the goal is to encourage more students to enroll in and complete a post-secondary degree or credentials. And the focus will be on students historically underrepresented in higher education. Under the Chev oversees finance in higher ed for the state as well. And this year, there has been an increase in state financial aid for students attending college. It's scheduled for the fiscal year of 2024 to begin in the amount of $30 million. JLAR, Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, some of us are familiar with JLAR, is conducting a study on financial aid to see if the process can be simplified. So the Chev will be working with JLAR on that, and it would likely be over 2025. If the process for financial aid in the state of Virginia or Virginia residents is simplified. And then finally, there is a funding to assist current high school teachers who need to take classes in order to teach dual enrollment courses. From what Leanne, the assistant director of Chev Planning, noted to me was that the Virginia Department of Education is actually working with Chev staff on how to best spend the funds. And he noted out of the appropriation, 100,000 the first year and 100,000 the second year from the general fund is designated to Chev to develop a grant program to support public high school teachers who are completing college coursework in order to become credentialed.
Thank you for that. And now on to you, Joe, for the Virginia Department of Education.
Thank you. As you can see on the slide, I'm just really highlighting the outcomes of the most recent board meeting. And I'm getting you queued up. I'm going to ask you, Ann, a few questions. But as we can see, we met with the board and ABTEL's recommendations are now on the consent agenda for this week's meeting. As you know, we had recommended the Praxis chemistry cut scores, the physics cut score, as well as the biology. And as we remember, the cut scores were based on the recommendations from ETS's multi-state standing. And so as I presented a few weeks ago, I wanted to kind of capture, I guess, some of the discussion points and see what we can learn from that. And then, Ann, I'm going to ask you any thoughts as we plan for moving forward. So again, The ABTEL reviewed, and there was quite a bit of discussion about the sciences and the needs in the Commonwealth. But from the board's discussion, most of the questions that I received were around the rigor, of establishing the cut score and the impact. There were some discussion of alignment or correlation between the success on the praxis and effectiveness. And as we all know, typically the research is inconclusive there, but there may be some research around the content alignment for individual success. But again, the recommendations are now on the consent agenda. So on Thursday, the board members can choose to agree to those, or they may pull them for more discussion. And so we have tried to do our best to provide information around the rigor. But from previous discussions, some of the board members have been somewhat concerned about the establishment in suggesting that the teachers must have challenge and have some of the highest across the country in terms of the cut score rates. And so I did want to have that discussion today, and I wanted to make sure I gave our liaison an opportunity. Would you describe the discussion or any other sense or understanding from the board as we go into looking at, in the future, there will be more assessments, we know, right? So some of those same discussions and those questions about the K-12 assessments, I think this group has also expressed some concerns with. So if you want to capture anything I've missed or talk to us.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Joan. Yeah, I think the board was very grateful for ABTEL's recommendations and just generally supportive and deferential to your recommendations on and I don't anticipate any issue on final review. I think they will all go through. Joan did have the ETS representative there, and I think that was helpful. I think when your recommendations are in line with the ETS recommendations, and when they are in line with what other states generally are doing, you will find the board generally supportive. If you are going below what other states are doing or below what ETS is recommending, then you just got to justify it. And maybe even to the point of it would maybe helpful to have an ABTEL member come speak at the board whenever you've got a test, if you've ever sending us a recommendation that's below what most other states are doing or below what ETS's recommendation is. That would just be my only takeaway, not so much from this last meeting, but from our prior discussions. You asked about the student cut scores. Yes, the Governor Youngkin, in response to the NAEP scores, issued a 6 or 7 point plan back in October, I think it was. And the administration is bringing proposals to us. They are not on for a vote on Thursday, but they are telling us they're going to ask us to formally approve a goal or a plan to move the cut scores from what is described as the lowest in the nation to the highest in the nation. What Governor Youngkin's press release said in October was that the intention was to do that in time for the spring 23 test administration. As you, I'm sure, know, many states align their NAEP score, their state test scores kind of in the range of NAEP basic, and a handful align with NAEP proficient. Virginia's are on the low side. So some folks have identified Virginia's as being below, matching to below NAEP basic. And if so, that Virginia is an outlier on the low side. But to move us instead of from where we are to NAEP basic, to rather move us to NAEP proficient would be a very dramatic change, and essentially would our pass rates would go from in the 70% range to in the 40% range. There are also proposals which we will be hearing more about on Thursday that I don't know the details of, but that are proposals to, as the documents describe, separating accountability from accreditation. And I'm not absolutely sure what that means, but and then essentially creating a whole new accountability system and trying to do that through emergency regulations. And I'm not sure what that means or how quickly that would be implemented or what that would look like. We did hear a presentation at last month's meeting about the A through F grading system for schools that Florida uses, and there seemed to be some interest in that from some in the administration. But I don't really know what their proposal, and if it was an A through F grading system, what would schools be graded on? I just don't know. And how fast all this, and this could move very, very quickly if the administration's plans go forward, but I don't understand we'll be hearing mainly. I would encourage you to watch, if you're interested in those topics, both the work session discussions on Wednesday, and there is an agenda item related to them on Thursday, and then also the superintendent's update, which is at the very end of the agenda on Thursday. Her written update has some language addressing this topic. So if it hasn't already been addressed in those other moments, I think we'll hear more about it then.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you sharing that with us. I guess regarding the cut scores, it doesn't make sense to me to raise the cut scores without looking at the assessment itself. I think that there's a disconnect in that. And just raising a cut score, you know what's going to happen. You already know what the outcomes are going to be. So if you're going to look at the assessment and adjust the assessment and then rate it, it makes better sense to do that. But just raising a cut score is meaningless, to be honest with you. And it's just going to get the outcome that is, it's just going to lower the scores, like you said. And we did hear about the breaking out of the accreditation and achievement. The accreditation they're saying is more for compliance, that's my understanding. And then the achievement is actually looking at student growth or student outcomes as part of that. So that was shared with us at VAS. Not sure, we didn't get any, clarification on what it would look like, but that was the basics of what we heard. So thank you.
Tying it back to the topic of this group's work, one of the questions I asked of the woman who presented to us about the Florida system was, okay, if you had an A through F grading system for schools, how do you attract and retain great teachers to the DF schools? And she, as I understood it, said that they have financial incentives for the teachers to go to the DF schools in Florida. And I asked for more details about that, and she wasn't familiar with it. And one of the questions certainly I will ask, if we are moving to that kind of a system, what are we going to do to attract and retain teachers to the DF schools? But that may well be, what are the implications of these changes for teacher attracting and retaining and licensing great teachers? You all, that does overlap your work, and hopefully you will weigh in.
Another question from me in regards of proposed discussions. This group, specifically our subcommittee on licensure, has considered presenting some different alternate opportunities for individuals to meet those competencies, not just with the praxis or not just with the VCLA, or potentially having options. Just your thoughts. Is this the time for those types of discussions? And especially in the context of the literacy movement, the real emphasis on writing and communication skills. Is this the time for this group to propose, even considering reducing those requirements or having options for those?
So,
just some thoughts.
So as you know, there was some movement to take a serious look at licensure, starting, we were talking about it last year. I haven't heard that coming up again recently. The one thing I have heard, you heard Mr. Shaner talk today about looking for ways to lessen barriers to licensure. And there is an overall push to just reduce the numbers of regulations. There's an executive order the governor's issued to reduce the volume of regulations across all of government by some X percentage. And so there's a push coming from the cabinet level to just reduce numbers of regulatory requirements across the board. And he mentioned this effort going on with the Department of Finance and Department of Labor. I don't know anything about that, but that you all should be part of that for sure. And you heard me ask him about that. You all absolutely should be working to be vigorously part of whatever those conversations are to make, I mean, it may well be there are barriers we should be getting rid of or changing or making more flexible. Your expertise at that table would be invaluable.
For sure, for that one, I think the references are going to be around the apprenticeship model that we're working with in collaboration with the Department of Labor and Industry. And we'll be bringing that as a presentation to this body as well.
Beyond that, I can't really opine whether, well, I'm not sure this is a great time for it just because there's so much else on the plate, but if it ties into the Literacy Act work, for instance, would be a great way to, if it can be supportive of the Literacy Act, that's a very bipartisan thing and lots of opportunity there. And also it doesn't hurt to be studying it for, I mean, you know how to get presentations and think about what we should be doing a year or 2 years from now. Now's the right time to start on it. So
just wanted to ask your thoughts. I know I hadn't asked you that in advance, but again, there are so many things going on right now. I'm just trying to figure out if this is the right time, because I believe there's been discussion to try to remove the VCLA, but that is the only assessment that's required of all endorsements around literacy, especially for the secondary, not elementary, but for secondary. That would be the only assessment that's there. So having a discussion about potentially removing that may or may not be fruitful for us at this time. But in those meetings, I'm also challenged, right, with the questions about the rigor, right, of the assessments. So it's hard to hear that they want to reduce barriers and for us to think about barriers when we're still held at such high, high standards for the rigor of things.
I don't think that schools of education are against the VCLA. I think that if we had alternative, like if they've attempted it several times, if we could find some way that we can document that they have met these skills, because it does disadvantage our second language learners, even our underrepresented populations. They are the ones that are struggling the most with that test. And so if we could find some ways that we can document it in a different way, especially if they can pass all of the elementary. We have students who pass every practice for the elementary, including the reading specialist test, but are struggling with VCLA.
just respond to that briefly. On our student English language tests for high school, to graduate from high school, we have created some flexible alternatives specifically for, as you're saying, this person who's going to go on and be a Harvard physicist, but not a native English speaker, and their language may never be as comfortable English as native speakers. We've created a number of alternatives, including there's some test that's sort of more business English. Some of you may, I see David nodding his head, that's given a number of our high school students a way to graduate that were struggling, had passed everything else, but struggling with their English language tests. So maybe there's a model there for what you're talking about.
Right, and if they are hired provisionally, say they're dismissed from our program, they're hired provisionally, they can circumvent that test. And so there's the pieces to that we feel like we're kind of disadvantaging those that are enrolling in teacher education programs and really seeking to follow that traditional path. We're disadvantaging them in some way, and I just hate to do that.
I was going to give just a second or two of background here, maybe for some folks who just weren't part of this. But so one of the most important things that ABTEL can do is make recommendations on cut scores and things like that, that determine whether or not whatever that score is to get your license, okay, for the assessments, praxis assessments. So last year, actually, I think it was the year before, we were thinking about ways that the board could help with teacher shortages. And that if we could adjust the cut score on a praxis test by 1 deviation, then that could potentially open the door up for more folks to go into that particular endorsement area. So we did that. I think it was the middle school math is the one I think we started with. And so we made the recommendation to the board that we go one deviation, 1 point below. And that was approved. So we thought at that time that this was a way that the board, ABTEL, could make recommendations to the board that could support or help alleviate some of the teacher shortages that were going on. So this year, whenever we had a chance to review these tests, is that we talked about, and we had the ETS representative here, should we do that same thing, especially in areas that are very hard to staff? Trying to find somebody to teach physics and chemistry is they're not easy tasks, as any high school principal would tell you, or any HR person. So we looked at maybe reducing that too. And one of the things, and a little bit of information that I hope the ETS representative had a chance to look at, we were curious too, is that, so how does one standard deviation point change the pass rate on this test? And I think they were going to go back and do a bit of research on that. So, but this time, whenever that recommendation got to the board, it was changed, and that is that the board was very interested in doing some things to help alleviate teacher shortages, but not in the reduction of the rigor of these tests. So I think where we are right now is that we're all, as a board here, trying to figure out exactly how we can be supportive of whatever initiative it is, and trying to figure out is that what do we really need to be examining. Some of these things, like the conversation here about should we bring up some major changes in teacher licensing and these assessments go along with it. I'm worried that we're hesitant about examining them because of what may or may not happen later on. And so I guess my main point is that we need to dive into that and see if that's the right thing to make a recommendation for, regardless of what is going to happen after our recommendation is made. So we have some other things to talk about, but I encourage us to go ahead and have a look at it and see. And yeah, so after, what's that country music song? After three, maybe it's me. So I've already had 2 strikes. I don't want to get the third one, but anyhow, yeah.
Just real quick, I know our time is at the end. You see on the screen again, other results. The board has accepted and is in final review of the endorsement new proposals. And so that will go again to the board for final review this Thursday, as well as the biannual results and the annual educator preparation profile has gone forward, and we'll do a demonstration on Thursday. So hopefully you'll hear all positives from those 3 items that Janelle Torbert brought forth in our last meeting. Also, we are advertising with the support of the board for 2 vacant positions. And now we actually have 3 vacant, but 2 are going forward. And you see those secondary, we need a secondary classroom teacher and a public higher ed institute. And so I believe it is due in November. I can't remember the deadline. Oh, December the 1st. So that went out in the SUPS memo, just making you aware of that process goes out in the SUPS memo. Individuals can nominate themselves or others can nominate them, and there's a selection process. But hopefully they'll be joining us in early January for those first meetings. So I wanted to make sure you're aware of that and share that with your family and friends. And I think closing comments, and then we'll break into our subcommittee for teacher prep today only.
Any closing comments before we adjourn? All right, so do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Do I have a second? I knew Jennifer would give me a second. And do you need to do roll call? Okay, all right, and this meeting is adjourned, and then we will move to lunch and to committee meeting.
Andy, I think you're leading our meeting. We thought about staying and get your food and bring your food back here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Rosalind, make sure you sign.
Yeah, the last couple.
And then I've got travel expense reports, if you need your travel expense reports. Of course, sir, of course I do, just for you.